All right, Aries, welcome to your weekly Sidereal Astrology forecast. This is going to be from March 28th through April 3rd of 2016. I'm Athen, and this is for Sidereal Astrology. If you are new to the channel, be sure to check out the link down below because the signs are different. All right, so this week, Aries, we are still in the lunar eclipse cycle, which has been involving your 6th house of Virgo, which is about transforming yourself spiritually and perhaps even on the everyday level. This has been the illuminating point since last week. So if any new insights came to you specifically about where you can improve your life, where you can perhaps improve your work life, your routine, your health, your diet, your regimens, these kinds of things, I think it's a good time to implement that this week because we will be approaching the third quarter phase, which is about grounding and working with those insights. So within the context of that, we do have the sun still in your 12th house. In fact, there's a lot of focus on your 12th house this week. We've got the sun here, first of all, so your energy and prana can be gained by working behind the scenes. In fact, I think it's an excellent week for meditation, for yoga, for spiritual activities, for prayer, for anything you do that connects you to either God or the present moment. And that's what this time of the year is about for you anyways, because a lot of you will be coming up to a lot of new beginnings here very shortly in a couple weeks once the sun goes into your sign. All right, but it's a good time to rest. It's a good time to meditate and reflect in life. So that's seen by the sun, but also Venus is shifting in here this week, so you can actually enjoy it. And Venus is going to be forming a couple important aspects, which I'll talk about. But while that's going on, I think there is enjoyment to be had with the willingness, hopefully, to go with the flow and loosen the reins a little bit to see where the divine process takes you. And that might be specifically involving relationships too, since Venus does rule your 12th house. Now, Jupiter is still squaring up to Saturn coming off of last week. We'll be finishing this weekend, though, at least within 1 degree. So the key with this is that there's reflection, I think, about your self-expression. In fact, the self-expression is a brand new area of your life. It's the North Node shifting into here for the first time in 18 years. And so there's now new beginnings for you in terms of finding your true voice, finding your passions, your interests, your self-expression. And although it's reflective, it's good to implement it. And I think there's a lot of support with that. Saturn is saying maybe it does take hard work, maybe it does take discipline to do that. But that can be excellent when the hard work and discipline is implemented. Now, Saturn has been retrograde since last week in your 8th house, so perhaps you're re-examining what's really meaningful to you in life, which I feel like is excellent, especially involving what you're building at the moment in terms of maybe intimate relationships or maybe shared resources, cooperation, sharing things with others. And all in all, the 8th house is really about beginnings and endings, life, the transformational aspects of life in terms of what is beyond the veil, what is behind the surface, in terms of what about life you really enjoy and really connect to and what you're building here. Perhaps re-examining some of these things that you can build so that they are more in alignment with that true meaning to you. And of course, Chiron's still very close to the South Node, but this is finishing up also. And so this is specifically involving old concepts about spirituality, perhaps. Old over or under extremes about alone time or meditative time or going with the flow that might be taken to an over extreme. Okay, but this has been an ongoing healing energy already. And so nothing new here, but if there's any old wounds that you're feeling, specifically deep in the psyche, deep with your spiritual self, I think it's an excellent week to continue to dive deep with self and heal any wounds that you might have arise from this. And of course, it all comes from acceptance. And that's really what the 12th house shows us, is accepting the divine process or accepting life. Now this week we do have some important aspects. Tuesday and Wednesday, Venus is going to go over that South Node Chiron. So when it does come to your relationships and it does come to your values, maybe even the material values such as finances, it's important that you're open to change here, that there's perhaps some old perspectives, some old notions about these areas of life which are being released at the moment with Venus this early part of the week, and maybe even healed. Maybe some healings taking place with your relationships, maybe with your sense of self-worth, right? Your self-reliance even too. And being grateful for what you have, I think, is excellent with this kind of conjunction. Now, Mercury is also going to be squaring up to Pluto and trining up to Saturn this same part of the week, Tuesday and Wednesday. So in terms of Pluto, this has been that there's been a lot of changes to your life path. And right now, I think there's a lot of thought, perhaps, about your deep spiritual self. maybe in regards to your dream space, maybe. You know, your spiritual intuition is very strong at the moment. So with all of this focus on the deeper side of life and perhaps yourself spiritually, it's good with all these aspects up to your 12th house to work on it constructively, especially with a trine up to Saturn. How can you integrate yourself spiritually? How can you, perhaps with Mercury, get a routine that is geared around spirituality, such as meditation or yoga or anything that you do that is perhaps a spiritual activity? Or maybe just implementing more presence in your day, perhaps. Because it's really suggesting that there's this merging between the daily activities and what is normally a non-daily activity of spirituality, you know, the alone time. But it can be merged, it can be combined. And with these aspects, it's saying, look, you've got the support to do that this early part of the week. Maybe there are some deep, intense thoughts. Maybe there's some deep, intense communications. Maybe some things that do need to be restructured with the routine. But whatever it is, it's taking the action, being patient with it, and working on that this week. Now, later in the week on Thursday, Mercury does go over Uranus. And so with this, there might be some feelings like you want to free things up. And hopefully it's freeing up your life so you have more peace and presence. That's what Uranus in the 12th house has been showing you. How when you do accept the life process, when you do have faith and trust, it frees you up spiritually. You have freedom here. And there's a strong sense of individuality too about expressing your true spiritual self. So maybe some things to consider with that on Thursday. But if you are feeling like mixing things up, I think it can be excellent, especially when, again, it's about implementing this spiritual process. Now, the weekend doesn't have any major aspects going on, but I do want to cover it. So the moon will be in Capricorn. So it could be a weekend perhaps of cultivating your success, your career, having that big picture perspective in life. And all of that can be, I think, illuminating, because the moon at the top of the chart, you could be gaining some insight over the weekend. It makes it a good time to reflect, to see where you're headed and how a lot of this can be integrated with all these major shifts and changes for you, particularly with right now this week, your 12th house of peace, presence, and where you can find that acceptance of the life process. All right, Aries, so I hope you guys have a great week. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next week.